Matt Cobb coming to you with another daily devotion, and we're going to finally wrap up in this section of James chapter 3, calling it the fruit of wisdom. So this will be part 3. Hope you've stuck through all of this, but there's just so much good stuff as James is kind of putting a little bow on this first section that he's been talking about. So just to do a quick recap of those first 2 sessions. In part 1, we were talking about, God's wisdom does not have jealousy, does not have selfish ambition. It's not focusing on ourselves and not looking to what we can get out of it and so forth. And that when we are doing those kinds of things, it's going to cause disorder and chaos and stuff. And that's not what God is intending and designing for us to do. And then when he kind of turns the page and then talks about, well, this is what wisdom is. That he talks about, we covered 4 of the 8 things last time, that it's pure, that it's not mixed in with other things from the world, that it's peace-loving, and that also means to be kind of at whole and kind of resting in the completeness of what God has given us, that it's gentle, it's equitable, fair, reasonable, that it's also willing to yield to others, that it speaks to the quickness of being obedient and working with others. So let's read the passage. We'll dive into the last 4 parts that James talks about what wisdom is and kind of puts this little capstone on this section. And then we'll move on into James 4 next week. Woohoo! Okay, so this is in James chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. If you are wise and understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life, doing good works with the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you are bitterly jealous and there is selfish ambition in your heart, don't cover up the truth with boasting and lying. For jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. But the wisdom from above is first of all pure. It is also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It is full of mercy and the fruit of good deeds. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. So we talked about the pure, peace-loving, gentle, willing to yield to others. And then he says that it's full of mercy. And this is this aspect of being compassionate. And it's kind of the idea that if we understand how much we have received mercy from God, then we're going to be able to see and start readily seeing the mercy and compassion that other people need around us, and being forgiving and loving, just because we know how much God has lavished on us. We know, if anything, we best of all know the sinners that we are. And so we know how much God has been merciful to us. And so we're much more quick to dole out and hand out mercy to other people that need it as well too. Because if we've been forgiven so much, we can extend forgiveness to others. And then he goes on to say that it's full of mercy and the fruit of good deeds. And I kind of dug into the Greek that James used there. And what he's literally saying is that it's full of inherently good fruit. It's full of inherently good fruit. And so I kind of was thinking about that a lot. And I was like, well, that sounds very similar to in John 14 when Jesus is talking about that I am the vine and you are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing. But when you're connected to me, you can bear much fruit. And so I kind of started thinking that James is saying that when we're connected with Christ, when we have the wisdom of God, that we are going to become more and more and more like Christ. So the things that we do in our lives, the fruit that is naturally produced from our connection to Christ, is going to look more and more and more like Christ. So it becomes inherently good fruit. I mean, he'd already talked about this aspect that an olive tree doesn't produce figs and a fig tree doesn't produce grapes. Or, this aspect that when we're connected to Christ and we're a Christ follower, our deeds will look like Christ. and then shows no favoritism. He talked about that already as well too earlier on in his letter, that the aspect of, if somebody comes in with wealthy looking clothes and you treat them better than somebody that has nothing or appears to have nothing, that you're showing that one person is more important than the other. And James is like, we're all equal at the foot of the cross. We all have this desperate need of Jesus Christ. And so it's impartial. It's not showing any kind of favoritism. And then lastly, it says it's sincere. And literally what that word means is without hypocrisy. So it's not two-faced. The wisdom of God isn't saying one thing to one person and another thing to another, or it's not saying something to one person but then going and doing the exact opposite. But we are what we say we are. We do what we say we will do. If we are people of God, then we honor the things that we say. And so we're also slow to make those promises and commitments and things like that. And so I love that this list that James gives us of the wisdom of God is actually kind of very similar to what Paul talks about in Galatians of the fruit of the Spirit. He gives 9 things, James gives 8, but there's a lot of overlap with this aspect of peace and gentle, mercy and stuff like that. And so I love that there's this harmony between the letters of James and Paul and so forth. And as he wraps this section up, then he reminds us also that the people that have God's wisdom, they plant seeds of peace. They are peacemakers. They're ones who are seeking to reconcile not only people to each other, but also people to God as well too. And that when they do that, they reap a harvestness of righteousness. And so I just love the pictures and imageries that James has used in this as he's kind of putting a nice little bow. And then he's going to dive in a little bit more after in the next chapter as we talk about getting closer to God and this aspect of our nearness and our relationship with him. So be encouraged, guys. The wisdom from God is not something that we just get all at once and, whoa, we're done. It's a continual process in our lives. And it's a continual being willing to step out when we have the opportunity to exercise that wisdom to do that. So it's little by little, it's baby steps in growth, but as we do it more and more, we become more and more sensitive to that Holy Spirit. So be encouraged, guys, dig into it, apply that wisdom to your lives, and trust that God will grant you that peace and the righteous living, that right standing that he says comes from those who plant the seeds of peace. So have a great weekend, guys, and we'll catch you next time.